Good morning and welcome to this learning video. So, you're working with your data in Excel and suppose you need to tell a story of your data, but you just don't want it to be numbers. You want to see patterns instead so you can make sound decisions of your data. Well, I'm going to show you how you can do that very effectively with creating what I call a bar graph with variance. And that's what you're looking at right now. So I want to mention that basically variance charts are not just basically subtraction. They're also decision-making tools. For example, regions consistently missing their targets. You want to quickly spot that. Or products that always exceed your expectations. Maybe there are seasonal dips or spikes in your sales. So again, these raw numbers can be turned into a story so that you can see patterns, not just numbers. Or it helps us diagnose why performance could be off. Any certain number of sales reps always below their targets? You can make it easier to ask smarter questions like that. Or is one product line dragging down the whole entire category? Or maybe did a promotion cause a sudden jump? And again, the chart would become a conversation starter, not just a simple report. How about that it supports better forecasting and planning? Because when we see variance over time, we can adjust future targets, reallocate resources, identify unrealistic goals, and even improve budget accuracy. Because these variance charts will help us plan forward, not just look backward. Aha. And then also, it could reveal the magnitude of our success or perhaps trouble that we could be getting into. Because again, the variance bar chart shows any small misses that may not be worth worrying about or big misses that need our immediate attention. How about huge wins that are worth celebrating? In other words, it will visually separate the meh from the wow or must fix. So let's tackle that and how we can do it. What I have here is basically looking at sales target versus what the actual sales were, which gives me the difference of which I convert into a variance bar graph. But how about maybe you run a small home cleaning service and maybe each month you want to set a target number of customer appointments versus the actual appointments. And that would be your variance. Or how about you want to monitor your weekly website traffic? Maybe you manage a small business website and you want to target the number of weekly website visits that are done at the end of each week. So you can check that with actual visits and then calculate the variance from what you targeted. How about weekly orders packed? You've got fulfillment and operations. So you run that small fulfillment team and you set a target number of orders that are to be packed each week. And at the end of the week, you compare the actual number of orders that were packed to what your target was. And then you can calculate, again, the variance and show it very easily in the bar graph. And I just thought of another one. How about a monthly training attendance? There's internal training done with HR, and what you do is you schedule monthly employee training sessions, and what you're trying to do is set a target number of attendees. And then what you can do is compare the actual people who attended versus what you were targeting. And again, this is for any kind of organization, whether it's a corporate, nonprofit, education, small business. So I think that has you armed pretty well with how powerful and useful this bar graph with variance scenario can give to you. All right, how do I do it? Here we go. So I've got these rep names. They've got their actual target sales, and all I did was I simply created a formula that subtracts the difference. So what I did was I took the target and I subtracted the actual. Now some numbers you see are going to be positive and some are going to be negative. And that's where the variance graph is going to come in. Look how easy that is to quickly analyze your data and be able to tell an effective story out of it, rather than just looking at a bunch of columns and rows of simple numbers. This is a lot more visual. All right, so how did I do it? Well, start off by creating the if function first. Equal if, open paren. Now, what I want to do is I want to test if the value that's in G8, if it's less than 0. So I type in G8 less than 0. That's my condition, comma. Now I'm going to have a new function inserted inside the if function called repeat, R-E-P-T. And what it does, it will repeat text a given number of times. So what I want to do is I want to insert initially what we call the piping symbol, which is a vertical line. And it will repeat in this cell the number of times that it will see the value in the difference column. In this first example, there will be 44 vertical lines in this cell. So the syntax is double quote mark, the piping symbol, which is the vertical line. And by the way, that character is the same button on your keyboard as the backslash key, which is right under the backspace key. Then I type in my double quote. Then I type in my comma to separate with the next argument, which is going to be the third function called the absolute function. So if there's a negative number in column G, I want to make it a positive number so that I can have that particular number of vertical bars. So ABS is the name of the function, open paren, use the cell address of G8, close the paren, then close the paren from the report function, comma, and what do I want to do if the if function fails? Just leave it blank. So I put a double quote right at the end, and then I type in the closing paren, press enter. Now nothing's there because the variance is going to be negative. In other words, the difference is positive, so the variance is not visible on the left-hand side here, but rather it will be visible on the right-hand side, which leads me to the next thing as to how I create the formula for the second column. Now, before I do that, you'll see that it doesn't look very clean, and I need to fix that up. Here's how we do it. And by the way, I just used the autofill to get the remaining rows. So I'm going to highlight this range again, and I'm going to change the font to something I like to use for this called the stencil font. Now, I've tried a variety of different fonts, and this just seems to come out the cleanest. And again, it's called the stencil font. And there it is. Look at that. Isn't that a beautiful thing? And then I make sure it's left aligned. And as you can see right here, I have a variance of negative 20, or the number is negative 20. So the variance is 20. And then you'll see here, it's a smaller number, negative 3, then negative 61. You'll see the bar chart reflect immediately. Now, what if I change one of the values? Will it automatically update the graph? Absolutely. So right here, I've got a difference of 61. I'm going to change the actual from 117 down to 97, and watch what happens in column H. It just got smaller, as you probably figured. Now, I'm going to take this formula and copy it over from column H to column I, and then I have to make a minor modification. And here is the change in the formula right here. I had to change it from less than 0 to greater than 0. And as you can see here, I then filled the formula down to the bottom row, and you will see that I can change the color to green instead of red. And then, like I mentioned before, I highlight the range, and I will change the font to stencil. It'll just give that nice, clean, formative look. And there we go. Isn't that a beautiful thing? So again, as I mentioned in the outset, this bar graph with the variance has so many uses. And let me just real quickly change one of the numbers. Over here, you will see positive 44. Well, I'm going to change the number of the target, for example. So instead of being 83, maybe it will be 93. And watch how this will update automatically. And there we go. It's a beautiful thing. All right, so I hope you enjoyed this video and can think of many, many ways where you can tell your story of your data, not just with numbers in rows and columns, but rather more easily and effectively with a bar graph. And as always, check out my email address. Send me questions about anything in Microsoft Office, not just Excel, but all the Microsoft Office products, as well as Copilot. Copilot inside of Excel, inside of Word, inside of Outlook, inside of PowerPoint, inside of OneNote, inside of Teams, inside of OneDrive. I'm your guy, and my rates are very reasonable. Thank you and good day.